Hey, what's going on, GameLeapers? This is Eggs, and in today's upload, 10 most underrated champions for 12-17. So these champions might not be picked or banned as much as the most OP champs on the Rift, but they are certainly some champions who pack a mean punch and will definitely win you some games. And of course, we're going to give you the runes, the items, the skill order, the summoner spells you have to run on these really good picks on the 12-17 Rift, so make sure you stick around for the whole video. And guys, if you want to master any of the champions in this video or any of the roles in the game, make sure you check out the GameLeap website, linked in the description or comment section. If you don't, you're going to be guaranteed hard stuck for the rest of your league careers, because our challenger players and coaches are uploading daily videos that are designed to help you apply everything the best players in the world do. So we have high elo VOD analyses, we have champion courses and guides, so much content. So get that exclusive access to our library of content by signing up, and let's get into the countdown. Now let's start in the bot lane, and we're going to talk about one of the most underrated supports at the moment. And when I say Senna, you might be like, but Senna's actually kind of popular. Well, yes, she is, but lots of people are forgetting about Senna because other supports are super broken right now. So champions like Yuumi, Lulu, Janna, Renata, these are no doubt maybe better than Senna, but Senna is still an excellent pick and actually does very, very well into these champions. Interestingly enough as well, when you pair Senna with something like a Swain, maybe a Sion, even something like a Rengar in the bot lane, there are some really interesting and fun combos you can come up with. So if you have a duo partner, it's really fun to test out. Just make sure on Senna that you run Presence of Mind. Getting a mirror mana is just such a waste of gold. It takes way too long to come online, and by doing this, you can actually just rush Umbral Glaive into your Eclipse, into a Rapid Fire or Mortal Reminder, depending on what you need to beat the enemy team composition. And I'd highly recommend guys as well to run Heal as Senna, and your AD carry to run something like Exhaust or Cleanse, maybe even Ghost. So Senna is the first and last, unfortunately, support in this video. Now the first and last AD carry in this video, well, I know that some of you are going to be like, how can Kai'Sa be underrated when she's picked so much? Well, the reason Kai'Sa is underrated is because, well, lots of people just aren't talking about her enough as being OP. These stats you can see are in Challenger and above, and to have a 53.5% win rate, well, thanks to those buffs last patch, they've really pushed Kai'Sa into OP territory. The only kind of bad thing about Kai'Sa at the moment, maybe, is that the strong supports, so champions like Janna, Yuumi, Lulu, with Kai'Sa, they don't really sound that good, because it's very hard to actually trigger Kai'Sa's passive and allow her to ult in and dive in there. So do be aware of that, guys, if you are going to pick Kai'Sa, because your synergy with your support, it certainly matters a lot. And you can see here what I was kind of getting at with Senna. As an AD carry, and especially as Kai'Sa, you'll be diving in there, and you can fend for yourself. Taking Exhaust with your flash is probably the best option. You might want to consider running Cleanse if you're against something like a Samira maybe, who might be running Exhaust, because Exhaust is really going to cuck you. So Cleanse in some matchups will be good as well, but with an early Kraken Slayer and then into PD, Berserker Screws, full attack speed and crit Kai'Sa, with your Q evolution, you will be one-shotting people. Just be a little bit careful during the early game. You don't have the strongest laning phase. Ideally, you want to get to like 2 to 3 items without being too far behind, and if you're ahead at that point, the game is all but over. So do consider picking Kai'Sa as an AD carry in 12-17. Now the next champion to talk about, you might think about playing Renekton mainly in the top lane, but in the mid lane, super underrated champion, and these stats are in Challenger across the world. And for Renekton to have a 53% win rate in over 2,000 matches, and just look at the pick and ban rate for me. He's only picked in 2% of games, but he's banned in 13%. This champion, lots of people in high elo, they just don't like playing against him. If you're going Blade of the Ruined King followed by Prowler's Claw, you will be one-shotting everyone, especially in the mid lane, because the champions are typically squishier. And another point of interest here as far as this rune page on your screen goes with Press the Attack, actually running 2 adaptive force. So not running an attack speed shard in there, this is going to maximize your damage output and one-shot potential, especially when you get Prowler's Claw. The damage is kind of devastating. You can also consider guys running something like Ignite instead of Teleport, especially if you think you need Ignite to actually beat the enemy mid laner, like you might be against maybe an Aurelia, for example. And if she runs Ignite, well then she's got 2 combat summoner spells, I only have 1, so I'm going to run Ignite as well just in case. So do think about that heading into your games. Just make sure you're maxing your Q, followed by your W, and then your E. So Renekton in the mid lane, very, very underrated, and lots of people on the enemy team will think you're going top lane, and all of a sudden, you're in the mid lane. He's also a great pick into lots of melee attack damage champions, so if you see a Yasuo, because your W shreds his shield, or something like a Yone, completely dumpsters them. Now moving on to the next champion, another mid laner here, but if you want to play an AP champion, you don't want to play Renekton, well how about Neeko? Because ever since the new Scourge came in, Neeko has really been flying under the radar. Look at this in Challenger Elo for me, in 230 odd matches, close to a 60% win rate. S tier tier champion, and you can see out of 60 mid laners, she's rank 1, but she's not even picked in 1% of games. So out of 100 challenger matches, you're going to see maybe one Neeko. That, to be honest, is a bit of a travesty for how good this champion is at the moment, and you can see this rune page with a ledge cube for the burst damage cheap shot that works with your Tangle Barbs and Pop Blossom, Eyeball Collection so easy to stack, and Relentless Hunter allows you to get around the map quickly, also really nice with your Shape Splitter movement speed. And then as far as the sorcery tree goes, taking Transcendence and Scourge, it gives you the ability haste so you can scale into a game, and Scourge gives you the early game power to easily win the laning phase. Bit like Renekton, you don't have to run TP, so you can run Ignite if you really want to go hard and win the 1v1. And as far as what you're building, guys, I'd highly recommend taking Everfrost because this works so well with your kit. The lockdown you have, enemy champions won't be able to move. I just highly recommend banning Kassadin. This champion is like the ultimate Neeko counter because he's very hard after a certain point to actually kill and hit with your skill shots. And that's what Neeko is, very skill shot based, so she might take a bit of time to actually learn and master, but a very underrated champion, and she's picked nowhere near enough as she should be. Now, following Neeko, let's say you want to play a champion who's maybe a little less team fight based. He's more about just creating so much pressure in the mid lane. Well, Heimerdinger is also a great shout. And ever since Riot buffed Heimerdinger a few patches ago, the champion's been super underrated. And you can run Scorch in your runes, but to be honest, as Heimerdinger, you don't really need it. You will be going Leandre's Anguish, and you kind of already have tick damage in the form of your turrets. And thanks to the buffs to your turrets, you only need 1 point in your queue. So obviously take this at level 1 and make sure, guys, you're setting up your queue before minions spawn. You do not want to be playing under your tower as Heimerdinger. You are about getting priority and creating that pressure. So then after this, you're maxing your W and then your Q and then your E. Just make sure you're taking Presence of Mind and Mana Flow. These two together give you so much of the blue stuff during the laning phase, so you should never run out of it. And that's really what Heimerdinger is. If you don't have mana, you are not a champion, so that's really important as well. After Leandre's, you can get Zhonya's, you can get Deathcap, you can get Voidsoft. Even Rylai's is really good because it procs off your turrets. Enemy champions will be slowed and your team can clean up a lot easier. And I'd probably just say if you do want to play Heimerdinger in the mid lane, highly consider banning Yasuo because his wind wall is such a big cuck to you, and because he has such high mobility, he's very hard to actually beat in the mid lane, even if you are a very oppressive laning champion like the Donger. So those were the mid laners. What about the junglers? Well, there's only one jungler I'm going to recommend here, guys, this being Sett. So you could play Sett in the mid lane for sure, but I actually think Sett in the jungle, and you can see this is in Challenger across the world, in over 600 matches, a 53.5% win rate. This is for a champion who isn't really a champion until level 3. So in high reloads, Zeds might get actually caught out a little bit more, but these stats obviously tell us that's not really the case. So because of the E buff, where it's costing less energy, you are starting with this. So put a point in your Shadow Slash at level 1. Then you're going to clear your camps, get your Q second, W third, and then max your Q. So because of that buffs, Zed's clear speed has actually gotten better. You'll be healthier coming out of the jungle as well. And by running this rune page with the sudden impact buff, so you're actually getting 9 lethality now whenever you use your W or your ultimate. That is a lot of lethality. And the amount of damage you do with sudden impact over the course of a game, pair this with first strikes damage, you get so much gold. You're able to get your early to mid game items quickly, which is when Zed is a real powerhouse. And even in the late game, you are very scary indeed. I would just think, guys, about the enemy team. So if they have a lot of maybe bruisers or tanks or people building armor, make sure you get Eclipse as your mythic. You can always consider going something like Prowler's Claw or Dustblade if you're really snowballing, and if the enemy team just has like 0 armor and they're all squishy champions, but Eclipse is definitely going to be your best mythic item, so keep that in mind. But Zed in the jungle, because of the buffs, is very underrated at the moment, even though he might not have the best win rates in lower elos. Now moving on, the final 4 champions, guys, reside in the top lane here, and the first of these is Sett. And I know what you guys are thinking, Sett, how can he be underrated? Because in the majority of elos, so anywhere from let's say like Iron to maybe Platinum, he's an S tier champion, which he is, but is he really? Because the meta, if we think about it, it is decided by higher elos. So the champions you see in pro play, those are the champions when played by the best, are Giga OP. And if you were to look at Sett stats in high elos, or even like Master and above, he has around like a 45% win rate. So the fact that Sett is getting buffed in 12-17, I know it might cause a lot of commotion, but to be honest, it is justified. So what's happening, your W's AD ratio, it's actually increasing by 5% based off each 100 bonus attack damage you have. This will really come into fruition into the mid to late game as you start building attack damage for your items, and your E slow is also increasing by 20%. So this means when you use your face breaker, even with 1 point in it, the slow is 70%. That is really, really big, and it means the enemy champion can't kite you as much. And if you do land your E, think about pairing this with maybe like a stride breaker active, you are going to be able to 1-2 the enemy champion into a gray screen. So these buffs look really nice for Sett. And I know I mentioned Strikebreaker, but you guys should also consider going Gore Drinker as your mythic if the enemy team composition has a lot of melee close range champions, because Gore Drinker, the healing you have, it's going to be really, really useful. So Strikebreaker into maybe teams with a bit more range. Maybe they have a jungler who's ranged like a Graves or a Nidalee. Maybe even the top laner is a ranged champion like maybe a Teemo. Strikebreaker is just a must in those games, but if they have a lot of close range champions, like I said, Gore Drinker. So Sett is the first of 4 top laners, but what about if you want to play a bit of AP top lane action? Well, I'd highly recommend picking Rumble, but please, if you're going to pick Rumble, guys, remember that you have a lot of counter matchups in the top lane, so I'd really be picking Rumble when you know the top lane is just a free matchup. And the reason Rumble is so underrated is really because of the Scorch buff. So these stats, these are in high reloads, so from over 500 matches, for Rumble to have over a 54% win rate, highly respectable, right? And because of the Scorch buff, makes your early to mid game even scarier to play against. I also think the Night Harvester buff from a few patches ago, it's been super underrated for these champions, especially Rumble, because that mythic spike, pair this with Sorcerer's Shoes, it's very oppressive in the damage you deal, you will notice it. Just make sure, guys, if you're playing Rumble, you're maxing your Q followed by your E and then your W, and also try to keep your heat, so the actual bar under your HP bar, at least at that halfway mark, because your basic abilities will deal more damage. So what separates a great Rumble from everyone else, it's all about how they manage that heat and also their cooldowns. Be careful about using your W just for the fun of it. You really want this if you're going to get ganked. And I'd also say here, please put a ward down after the second wave, so at around 2:30 in the game time. This will protect you, because no doubt you will get ganked. Now moving on, the other AP champion in the top lane, well, we're seeing him a lot more in pro play at the moment, so if you don't want to play Rumble, please pick Kennen. This champion, yes, he does have some hard matchups, so if you're playing against maybe a Sylas, if you're playing against an Aurelia, these champions with that gap closing ability, and obviously Sylas, who can steal your ultimate, it doesn't sound too red hot. So a bit like Rumble, you probably want to be picking Kennen when you know you have a free lane. So if you're going into something that's maybe a bit tankier, or maybe a melee champion who you can kite around like a Renekton, Kennen works really well, and because of the buffs a few patches ago, especially to your ultimate AP ratio, when you do get Rocket Belt and you have Source Shoe, Shadow Flame, Death Cap, that AP is getting pumped into your Slicing Maelstrom, and you will be one-shotting people like you were before the durability meta came in. And it's kind of funny how the meta is slowly kind of shifting back to what it was, because these bursty champions are getting buffs, and Kennen is just one of them. But do be aware, guys, that if you lock in Kennen, you don't just insta-win. So at level 1, you do want to be a little bit careful. You can take your Q or you can take your E. So your E is really good to kite the enemy champion and to also be really aggressive. So do keep that in mind. Just make sure you're maxing Q, W, followed by your E, and you should be good. Now, the final champion in this video, guys, and the final top laner to consider, I know these stats, there aren't that many games here, but please, you have to trust me, Graves is going to be so OP. And honestly, I don't even want to say underrated. I could have put Graves on our top champions videos, because I think the champion at the moment is still really good in the top lane. So these stats are from Challenger. I know there's only 80 games, but he does have over a 50.5% win rate, and that's without the buffs that are coming in. So the buffs that are coming in, your Q's cooldown is going up at early ranks, so from 12 seconds to 13 seconds, but it's going down at later ranks to 7 seconds, not 8 seconds. And as a top lane Graves, you are going to be maxing your end of the line first. So once you do get to level 9, to be on a 7-second cooldown, this is just a great change, and also your ultimate is going to be dealing more damage at each rank. So this means that Graves is level 6 is scarier, and because the champion really doesn't have like many hard counters in the top lane, so it's not like picking Aurelia and oh my god, you have to worry about them picking Sett or them picking a Tryndamere. As Graves, you pick Graves and you're just like, oh yeah, sweet. So he's a great blind pick champion. So if you guys are struggling in those blind pick games, because they do exist, right? Not all the time you're going to be able to counter pick. Graves is honestly probably the safest blind pick in the top lane, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see him at Worlds if these changes stay in the game. Also really good, right? Because he's a flex pick. Lots of people probably think you're going in the jungle, and all of a sudden you go into the top lane. And I know this page, guys, is recommending Cull as a starting item. Please take Cull into free matchups. So those matchups where there's like zero threat to you, and remember your quick draw, your E is such a good tool to dodge the enemy champion's skill shots, so you really should have no trouble getting to your Eclipse Spike. And remember, we're really getting this for the armor penetration. It's going to allow us to scale, and lots of top laners will build a lot of armor against you, so that's really important. And you guys can consider going Ignite. You can go TP if you feel as if you can just win the lane without Ignite. So do keep all of these things in mind as far as your setup goes on Graves top. But those were the 10 most underrated champions, guys, for patch 12.17. Please let us know if you did enjoy the video, to leave a like down below. And until our next season 12 upload, this has been a... Peace.